Welcome to Chapter 10, Mutual Funds as Stockholders. A mutual fund is not only a buyer and seller of securities. Once it owns shares, it also becomes an owner with voting rights, governance responsibilities, and the ability to influence corporate behavior. This chapter follows that ownership role from a company's proxy filing through research, vote instruction, reconciliation, and public disclosure. We will examine director elections, executive compensation, shareholder proposals, contested campaigns, engagement, divestment, securities lending, and conflicts of interest. The central idea is simple. Pooled ownership creates pooled power. A fund may be voting shares on behalf of thousands or millions of investors, so the process has to connect investment judgment with operations and accountability. Buying the stock gets the fund into the room. Stewardship determines whether it quietly watches, asks difficult questions, votes against management, or heads for the exit. By the end, you should be able to explain not just how a fund votes, but why the vote fits its mandate and how the fund proves the vote actually happened. The opening case is one of the best reminders that influence is not always proportional to the size of the initial check. In 2021, Engine Number 1 owned a relatively small economic stake in ExxonMobil, but it built a focused case around strategy, capital allocation, and board skills. It nominated 4 directors and ultimately won 3 seats with support from major institutional shareholders, including large fund complexes. The results showed how a small activist can create leverage by persuading investors that governance change may improve long-term value. It also showed why mutual fund voting is not ceremonial. When millions of individual investors pool their ownership through funds, a handful of institutional voting decisions can help determine who sits in the boardroom. Engine Number 1's stake was small. Its argument was not. The campaign was basically the corporate governance version of showing up to a heavyweight fight with a very good PowerPoint. The lesson is not that every activist is right. The lesson is that funds need a disciplined way to evaluate the thesis, the nominees, the risks, and the expected benefit to shareholders. This chapter develops 4 practical skills. First, trace. You should be able to follow a proxy item from the company's filing through research, vote determination, instruction, reconciliation, and Form NPX disclosure. Second, evaluate. You should be able to assess director elections, executive compensation, shareholder proposals, mergers, and contested situations using a financial and fiduciary framework rather than a slogan. Third, compare. You should understand when engagement, voting, public escalation, divestment, or litigation may be appropriate, and what each tool can and cannot accomplish. Fourth, govern. You should be able to explain how conflicts, securities lending, vote execution, service providers, and board oversight affect the result. Some of this sounds procedural, but it is really applied judgment. A fund can have a beautifully written voting policy and still fail if the shares were on loan, the instruction was rejected, or the rationale had no connection to the mandate. The goal is not to memorize governance vocabulary. It is to build a process that an independent reviewer could understand and defend. 4 connected questions organize the module. First, why do funds vote? Ownership rights can protect value, improve accountability, and influence strategy, but the vote must serve the fund and its shareholders. Second, how does the vote work? Record dates, proxy materials, research, instructions, custody records, tabulation, and disclosure all have to line up. Third, how does stewardship escalate? A manager can monitor, engage privately, vote, speak publicly, file a proposal, support a contested slate, reduce exposure, or pursue legal remedies. Fourth, where do conflicts arise? The advisor may have business relationships with the issuer, The shares may be on loan, an index mandate may limit the ability to sell, and political pressure may push in opposite directions. These are not separate chapters hiding on one slide. They form a chain. The reason for voting guides the analysis. The analysis guides the action. The operations determine whether the action occurs. The conflicts determine what controls are needed. A governance policy without that chain is just a very serious document waiting for someone else to do the work. The proxy voting lifecycle is an operating process. Step 1 is the agenda. The company files proxy materials and identifies the matters that shareholders will decide. Step 2 is research. The advisor, an internal stewardship team, or a proxy advisor, evaluates the governance and financial implications. Step 3 is the decision. The fund applies its policy, considers issuer-specific facts, and addresses any conflicts or exceptions. Step 4 is instruction. Vote files move through custodians, agents, and voting platforms. Step 5 is reconciliation. The fund checks record date positions, loaned shares, rejected ballots, and any mismatch between intended and accepted votes. Step 6 is disclosure. Registered funds report their votes publicly on Form NPX and respond to oversight questions. Notice how the process moves from judgment to plumbing. A brilliant vote that never reaches the tabulator is not stewardship. It is an opinion trapped in a spreadsheet. The fund therefore needs evidence at every handoff: what was received, who decided, what was transmitted, what was accepted, and what was reported. Stewardship combines investment analysis with data, custody, record keeping, and deadline discipline. Not every ballot item asks the same investment question. Director elections require analysis of skills, independence, tenure, attendance, accountability, and whether the board needs refreshment. Executive compensation asks whether pay is connected to durable performance, whether the metrics can be gamed, and whether dilution or severance is reasonable. Auditor votes involve independence, fees, tenure, and the quality of financial reporting oversight. Capital structure items can change shareholder rights through new share issuance, buybacks, dual class structures, poison pills, mergers, or reorganizations. Shareholder proposals may address governance, climate, human capital, political spending, or additional disclosure. Contested elections and mergers require a full strategic and valuation assessment, not a shortcut based on who wrote the more dramatic letter. The annual meeting is one ballot, but it is not one decision. Think of it as a menu where every item has different ingredients and a different risk of indigestion. A policy creates consistency, but issuer-specific analysis is what keeps consistency from turning into automatic voting. The fund should be able to explain what value mechanism each vote is intended to protect. Engagement and divestment solve different problems. Engagement preserves the fund's economic exposure and ownership rights. It can seek changes in governance, disclosure, capital allocation, or strategy, but it requires resources, access, patience, and a credible escalation plan. Results may be slow and difficult to attribute. Divestment or position reduction acts more quickly by removing exposure to a risk the manager no longer wants. But selling may simply transfer the shares to another owner rather than change the company. It can also create taxes, trading costs, opportunity cost, and tracking error. For an index fund, selling because of disagreement may be impossible while the company remains in the benchmark. Engagement is closer to relationship counseling with quarterly filings. Divestment is the cleaner breakup, but it does not reform the former partner. The fiduciary question is not which tool produces the best headline. It is which tool fits the fund's mandate, expected return, risk, and ability to influence the outcome. Sometimes the answer is engage, sometimes it is sell, sometimes it is engage while preparing to sell if the evidence deteriorates. Stewardship works best as an escalation ladder rather than an emotional reaction. The first step is monitoring. The manager reviews filings, meetings, controversies, performance, and governance indicators. Next comes private engagement with management or independent directors. The fund should explain the concern, the supporting evidence, the expected change, and the time frame. If progress is inadequate, the fund can vote against directors, compensation or management proposals, or support relevant shareholder items. Public escalation may include publishing the rationale, joining a collaboration, or signaling voting intent. The fund may then file a proposal, nominate or support directors, reduce the position, divest, or pursue legal remedies. The latter does not require every step in every case. A fraud allegation or a major transaction may justify moving quickly. A routine disclosure concern may not require a press release and a marching band. The key is proportionality. Every step should connect to a defined concern, an expected outcome, and a review point. Credible escalation matters because management is more likely to take private engagement seriously when the fund has demonstrated that it will use stronger tools when evidence supports them. Index ownership changes the stewardship problem. An active manager can usually sell a company when governance risk overwhelms expected return. An index fund may hold the company for as long as it remains in the benchmark, so voting and engagement become some of the few available responses. Index funds also own broad portfolios, which means system-wide risk can affect thousands of holdings at once. Large fund complexes can build specialized stewardship teams and gain access to directors, but their scale also creates scrutiny. A small number of institutions may cast enormous blocks of votes across the market. At the same time, the low fees investors expect from index products constrain how much issuer-specific research can be performed for every meeting. Policies create efficiency, but exceptions still matter. An index fund cannot leave the party while the company remains on the guest list, so it has a strong reason to care about how the party is run. The accountability question is whether voting reflects financial value, stated investor preferences, business incentives, or external political pressure. Scale creates capability, but it also raises the standard for transparency and governance. Proxy advisors help funds process an enormous volume of meetings, data, and ballot items. They can standardize information, apply customized voting guidelines, identify unusual proposals, provide issuer research, and support vote transmission. That scale is valuable, especially for a fund complex voting across thousands of companies. But the proxy advisor is a tool, not the fiduciary. The fund still has to understand the methodology, test data quality, review conflicts, correct material errors, and decide when issuer-specific context requires a different conclusion. Recommendations should be monitored against the fund's own policy and investment mandate. Think of a proxy advisor as a sophisticated navigation system. It can map the route, flag traffic, and suggest a turn. It should not be allowed to drive the car, while the fund sits in the back seat pretending the destination was inevitable. Over-reliance creates model risk and influence concerns, while ignoring external research can waste your useful scale. The right approach is governed use, clear responsibilities, customization, exception review, periodic due diligence, and evidence that the final vote serves fund shareholders. Conflicts can arise even when the voting policy looks perfectly clear. The advisor or an affiliate may be seeking the company's retirement plan business. The issuer may purchase services from the fund complex, distributor, or another affiliate. Executives and directors may have personal or organizational relationships with decision makers. Votes involving affiliated funds, issuers, or transactions require special controls. Political pressure can come from multiple directions. with some clients or officials demanding more ESG action and others demanding less. Securities lending creates another conflict because lending revenue may compete with the desire to vote. None of these facts automatically proves that a vote is wrong. A conflict is not a conviction. It is a reason to strengthen the process. The fund should identify the relationship, determine whether it is material, remove conflicted personnel where appropriate, apply pre-approved procedures, and document the result. The uncomfortable truth is that a large financial organization can have a business relationship with almost everyone. Good governance does not pretend the relationships disappear. It makes sure they do not quietly decide the vote. Securities lending creates a direct trade-off between lending revenue and voting power. When shares are on loan across the record date, the borrower generally receives the voting right. The fund can recall the shares before the record date, but recall may reduce lending income, disrupt a scarce borrow position, or create operational costs. The decision should therefore reflect the materiality of the vote. A routine auditor ratification may not justify an expensive recall. A contested director election, merger, or change in shareholder rights may. In plain English, the fund has rented out the shares and may have rented out the vote with them. The challenge is deciding when getting the vote back is worth the rent that will be lost. A disciplined recall policy considers the significance of the meeting, the likely influence of the vote, the economic value of the loan, the timing of the record date, and whether the position can be recalled successfully. The file should show that the trade-off was evaluated before the deadline, not discovered after the meeting when someone asks why the fund's vote is missing. Proxy vote disclosure has become more standardized and easier to analyze. Since 2003, registered management investment companies have publicly reported their proxy votes on Form NPX, while investment advisors have maintained voting policies and disclosed how clients can obtain information. As index ownership grew, large complexes expanded dedicated stewardship teams. The 2021 Exxon contest made those institutional votes visible to a much broader audience. The SEC's 2022 Form NPX update standardized categories and structured data, improving the ability to compare records and analyze say-on-pay voting. More recently, voting policies have faced intense political scrutiny, especially around ESG and anti-ESG positions. Disclosure is valuable because it creates receipts. Investors can see whether the fund supported management, opposed directors, backed a shareholder proposal, or abstained, but the filing does not automatically reveal motive, analysis, quality, or impact. Two funds can cast the same vote for different reasons, and one vote may be only one step in a longer engagement. Transparency improves accountability. Interpretation still requires context, mandate, and evidence. The engine number one case brings the chapter's moving parts together. The activists argued that ExxonMobil needed stronger board skills, better capital allocation discipline, and a more credible approach to long-term industry change. The campaign nominated 4 directors, and shareholders ultimately elected 3 of them. Large funds did not simply lend the activists their votes. Each had to evaluate the nominees, the company's strategy, the board's response, and the connection to shareholder value. Operations mattered too. Record date positions, securities lending, vote instructions, and tabulation had to work correctly for the governance decision to become an actual result. And the story did not end when the votes were counted. A board election is an input, not the closing credits. Investors still have to monitor strategy, capital spending, returns, and whether the new directors improve decision-making. The case demonstrates coalition building. A small investor can influence a large company when the thesis persuades institutions whose pooled ownership carries far greater voting weight. It also demonstrates humility. Winning seats does not prove that every promised operating outcome will occur. Stewardship debates often mix three different ideas: financial materiality, system-wide risk, and investor values. Under a financial materiality frame, the fund focuses on cash flow, governance, risk, valuation, and the time horizon of the investment. Engagement and voting should connect to a plausible effect on shareholder value. A values or policy frame may reflect a product's stated investor preferences or a public objective. That can be legitimate when the mandate is clear, the trade-offs are disclosed, and investors have meaningful choice. But it may accept tracking error, opportunity cost, or outcomes that other investors would not prefer. The danger is not having a view. The danger is hiding the objective. Culture war labels can turn a difficult investment question into a team jersey. A fund should state whether it is protecting issuer value, addressing a portfolio-wide risk, reflecting a disclosed client preference, or pursuing another permitted objective. It should then explain the evidence, costs, time horizon, and governing mandate. Clear framing makes disagreement more productive because people can debate the actual mechanism instead of arguing over a label that means 5 different things to 5 different audiences. A fiduciary voting memo should explain both the investment judgment and the execution control. Start with the issue. What is being decided and what is the company's current practice? Next, assess materiality. How could the matter affect strategy, cash flow, risk, governance, or shareholder rights? Third, present evidence from filings, engagement, operating performance, independent research, and relevant comparisons. Fourth, connect the recommendation to the fund's policy and identify any conflicts or exceptions. Fifth, state the action clearly. Vote for, vote against, abstain, withhold, recall shares, engage further, or escalate. Finally, define follow-up. What outcome, timeline, and monitoring evidence will determine whether additional action is needed. The memo should survive a reviewer who was not in the room and does not share the writer's assumptions. That is a useful test because many governance decisions look obvious only after the conversation has been forgotten. A good record does not need to be a novel. It needs to show the issue, the value mechanism, the evidence, the conflict controls, the decision, and what happens next. Consider the dual-class technology company on this slide. The business is growing rapidly, and the founder remains central to execution, but the founder also controls the vote. Board independence is weak, and related party transactions are increasing. A shareholder proposal asks the company to phase in 1 share, 1 vote over 7 years. Start with materiality. How can weak accountability affect value even while current operating results remain strong? Next, engagement. What should the fund ask the independent directors about transaction review, succession, board refreshment, and the founder's long-term control, then evaluate the proposal itself? A gradual phase-out may improve accountability, but could it disrupt incentives, strategy, or the company's ability to plan? Finally, consider the portfolio response. Selling removes the fund's exposure, but it does not improve governance for shareholders who remain, and an index fund may not be able to sell. Founder brilliance is not a governance system, but neither is automatic opposition to every dual-class company. Pause the video and build a recommendation that states the evidence, the trade-off, the vote, and the follow-up plan. Defend the process, not just the answer. Pause the video and answer all 4 questions before continuing. Question 1. What is Form NPX used for? It is the annual public reporting of proxy votes by registered funds. Question 2. Why might a fund recall loan shares? To regain voting rights for a material shareholder meeting. Question 3. What is engagement? It is dialogue and escalation intended to influence governance, disclosure, or strategy while the fund remains an owner. Question 4. What is the key fiduciary question in a vote. Which action is reasonably designed to serve the fund and its shareholders under the fund's mandate? The other answers are tempting only if we confuse governance with popularity, administration, or product marketing. Form NPX does not calculate NAV. Recalling shares does not increase the coupon. Engagement is not automatic divestment, and the largest proxy advisor does not receive a fiduciary tiebreaker. Review any question you missed and explain why the correct answer fits the operating system developed in this chapter. The objective is not for memorized letters. It is a clear connection among ownership rights, investment judgment, operational execution, and accountability. 6 claims summarize the chapter. First, funds are owners. Voting and engagement are part of portfolio management, not decorative paperwork. Second, policy still needs judgment. Guidelines create consistency, but material cases require issuer-specific analysis. Third, execution matters. Record dates, securities lending, custody records, vote transmission, and reconciliation determine whether intent becomes action. Fourth, stewardship has multiple tools. A fund can monitor, engage, vote, file, nominate, speak publicly, reduce, divest, or litigate depending on the mandate and evidence. Fifth, conflicts are real. Business relationships, affiliates, politics, and lending revenue can influence incentives, so controls and documentation are essential. Sixth, disclosure creates accountability. Form NPX makes voting records visible, but the rationale and outcome still require interpretation. The broad lesson is that governance power comes with process responsibility. A fund does not earn credibility merely by announcing a strong view. It earns credibility by connecting the view to shareholder value, executing the decision accurately, disclosing the result, and monitoring what happened next. Chapter 11 shifts from funds as owners to the economics and regulation of retail distribution. This final page is the refresh register for Chapter 10. Posen and Hamacher provide the chapter's operating architecture. The SEC materials explain advisor voting duties, proxy vote disclosure, and the updated Form NPX framework. Investor.gov provides a plain language explanation of shareholder voting. ExxonMobil's meeting results and Engine Number 1's campaign materials document the 2021 contest from different perspectives. The Investment Company Institute and Corporate Governance Research sources provide industry context and continuing debate. Do not read the long web addresses aloud, and do not treat every source as if it answers the same question. A rule, a company announcement, and an activist campaign page, an academic or practitioner commentary have different incentives and evidentiary weight. Good stewardship analysis begins by knowing who produced the information and why. The durable questions are straightforward. What right is being exercised? What value mechanism supports the action? What conflicts exist? Did the vote execute correctly? And what evidence will be monitored afterward? Chapter 11 follows the investor dollar into retail distribution, where advice, access, compensation, platforms, and standards of conduct create a new set of incentives and controls.